Yeah.
What relationship do you have with you and your organization have with this government?
The U.S. government.
Particularly the administration.
I've had relationships with every administration here since I've been involved in this work. I know less information about what they're doing in this administration than ever before. The channel of information is entirely one direction. They're very open. I have contacts, friends on the Mitchell team, in the White House, in the National Security Council, in the State Department. I can get to them. No, I don't have a contact around them. I didn't know before, and it's very difficult to get to. The person that I'm trying to get to, more than anyone else, and if anyone knows her, is Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett is the filter, the main filter on the door of the Oval Office. You want to get to Obama directly, you have to go through Valerie Jarrett, more than Robert Manuel. And I haven't been able to figure out how to get to her. But I have pretty high-level contacts in the administration, but I get zero information in return. I had a really good relationship with this terrible person, Elliot Abrams, who was the Deputy National Security Advisor. And the amazing thing about we had a common friend who introduced us. Every email, every text message that I would send him, I would get back a response immediately. Immediately. Elliot would answer me. His answers were always terrible. It was really depressing reading his responses. But at least I knew what they were thinking. And he was the main person for Bush in the White House in charge of policy regarding Israel and Palestine. With these guys, I know nothing. Nothing.
Do you think that because they don't know?
Part of it makes me think it's because they don't know yet what they're doing. Part of it is because they determined a policy where they're not letting any information out, which is good and bad. It's good because it may make their work easier to do. It's bad because they have to build allies to support what they're doing in the region. They can't do it by themselves. So I don't know. I hope to gain some more insights when I'm in Washington. Yeah.
So if you could use your imagination, what do you think they're thinking?
There's a struggle going on, from what I can tell, on the axis of substance and process. And this is a struggle that's taking place in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process from the outset. The guru of process has been Dennis Ross. Dennis Ross is process. Create better relations, confidence building measures, confidence and security building measures, all these things with the emphasis on process. And I think that one of the main reasons for the failure of the peace process has been the overemphasis on process and the ignoring substance. This is about substance. We need decisions on the substance. I was pleased when Dennis Ross was brought into the administration but put in the State Department in charge of Iran. But 2 months ago, he was moved from the State Department to the White House to apparently oversee the whole Middle East process in the White House. And I asked, does this mean that Senator Mitchell has to answer to him? And I was told a definitive no. Senator Mitchell doesn't answer to Dennis Ross. But nonetheless, it seems to me that there is a struggle going on there on this question of substance and process. And right now, the process side is winning out. All these, getting them back to the table seems to be the emphasis. And as I've said, I think that's wrong.
What would your approach be? Since you say you can't work with settlements, it's not about bringing them back to the table.
Right.
What's your process?
Well, I think that a number of things have to take place in parallel. One is that the United States has to be ready in the very near future to put down the Obama parameters on the table. And the Obama parameters should be a remaking of the Clinton parameters, and they should add to that the regional dimension, because we have the Arab Peace Initiative as well. So look out beyond the region as well, and should translate the Arab Peace Initiative into a plan for implementation. Right now, the Arab Peace Initiative is a statement. So you need to translate that into a plan, how the regional normalization with Israel is going to be graduated into the process of Israel and Palestine and Israel and Syria. That's one thing that needs to happen. The second thing is that I would work very strongly to encourage the Palestinians to continue the unilateral development of the institutions of their state that they're doing, that's called the Salam Fayyad, Salam Fayyad, with the Palestinian Prime Minister, and he put down a plan to create the Palestinian state de facto within 2 years by building the institutions of statehood. And I would put all the American backing and all the American support behind the construction of those institutions and the upgrading of those institutions and the increasing role of the rule of law in the Palestinian society. And I would use American pressure to ensure that Israel begins to transfer greater parcels of land in Area C to the Palestinian Authority so they can expand their economic development. Netanyahu spoke about economic peace. You want to have economic peace, you've got to give Palestinians more land within the West Bank. Israel controls 60% of the land. That's Area C, under full Israeli control. And there are areas that Israel knows is going to be part of the Palestinian state, so let's begin to give Palestinians more authority over that. The third thing that I would do in working with the international community is that there are a number of different plans. One thing that I might do is through the quartet, which is the United States, the European Union, Russia, and the United Nations, and go to the parties and tell them that they have 6 months to submit their plan for how they're going to create peace between Israel and Palestine. In 6 months' time, the quartet will accept these plans, review them, and within another 6 months, the quartet will put down on the table its own plan for implementation of Israeli-Palestinian peace. These are parallel things. These are some things that one can be done instead of the other, but these are the kind of initiatives that need to take place. The last initiative that I've suggested already, and I hope will take ground, is that if, in fact, there is consensus in the international community on the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as I believe that there is, and I believe that the United States is willing to play along in tandem with the rest of the world and not use its veto against what the rest of the world wants, which is what the Bush administration did. Then we have a new possibility for changing what I call the perception of reality, which could change reality. If you're strong and powerful, and this gets into the question of the lack of symmetry, if you're strong and powerful, you have the ability to change reality. You create facts on the ground, and those facts are there and no one can undo them. That's the story of the settlements. That's what you do when you're strong. When you're weak, what you can do is change the perception of reality so that that will change reality. And what I've suggested to the Palestinians is that they declared independence in 1988. They declared their state. They were recognized by 104 countries at the time. Recognition of statehood is granted by other states. That's the mechanism in international law that gives recognition to states. You have to have some criteria that defines what a state is. You have to have control over territory. You have to have a people who are loyal to you. You have to have basic laws that govern your state and the ability to claim sovereignty, etc. Let's say that Palestine squeaks through those definitions, just barely squeaks through, because they control territory, not the territory that they ultimately desired to control, but they can, at this point, go to the United Nations and say to the United Nations, we no longer want to have observer status in the United Nations. We want to be a full member state of the United Nations. And the process for doing that is very simple. You write a letter. The President of Palestine, or the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Palestine, writes a letter to the Secretary General and says, we want to be members of the United Nations. We agree to abide by the Charter of the United Nations. We are a peace-loving nation seeking peace with all of our neighbors. That's the process. They can take the letter that the State of Israel submitted to the UN in 1948 and just cross out Israel and write in Palestine. It's the same letter. That's what the letter of request for membership says. It goes to the Security Council. It needs 9 votes of the Security Council, 9 of the 15, in order to pass, with none of the 5 permanent members vetoing it. If the United States won't veto it, it won't be vetoed. It then goes to the General Assembly, where it needs a 2/3 majority of the General Assembly, and all the countries of the world will vote yes, with the exception of Micronesia, the Solomon Islands, Iran, Libya, and Israel. And by the way, I point that out. This is the club of nations that Israel is joining today, the refuseniks. At that point, here we get to the perception of reality.